to derive an acronym, so that is ACT, which implies in the quadrant of a circle. So in the first quadrant here, we have all to be positive. That is, sine, cos, and tangent are all positive. Now in the fourth quadrant here, we have cos to be positive. In the third quadrant here, we have tangent to be positive. And in the second quadrant here, we have sine to be positive. Now, consider the question we are given here. So we are given sine x equals minus root 3 divided by 2, and we have to determine tan x and cos x. So because the sign of angle is given, so is said to be negative, that is sin x is negative root 3 divided by 2. Now we need to consider the quadrant of a circle in which the sign of an angle is negative, and they are in the third and the fourth quadrant. Because in the third quadrant, tangent is positive. It's only tangent that is positive in the third quadrant, while in the fourth quadrant it's only cosine that is positive, while here, so sine, cos are negative, here tangent and sine are negative. So therefore, we want to determine the tangent of angle x in the third quadrant, the cosine of angle x in the third quadrant, so also in the fourth quadrant, which means we need to consider the third quadrant. So by considering the third quadrant, we have the third quadrant here. So here we have a right angle triangle. Now this side is negative. So this side is negative. So this side here we have positive, here we have positive. So we have angle x, we place angle x here. Since sine of the angle given, sine x equals to opposite, that is, sine of an angle is opposite to hypotenuse, ratio of opposite to hypotenuse. So here we have opposite to be, so minus root 3, hypotenuse to be 2. So therefore, since this side is negative, that is along the vertical axis and below the horizontal line, so we have negative values there. So here we have negative, so here we are going to place root 3 here, so that is opposite. Since angle x is facing here, we have root 3 here. This is negative sign. There is no need to place negative sign here. Then here we have 2, which is hypotenuse. So opposite of hypotenuse, we have sine of an angle x. So where the sign here, so indicate that it is along the vertical axis and below the horizontal axis. To determine tan x and cos x, we need to determine the adjacent. So using Pythagoras theorem, and the theorem says that, so the side of hypotenuse square equals to opposite square plus adjacent square. So solving further here, from the question, this side is opposite. We are not going to consider the sign. So we are not going to consider the sign. So without considering the sign, we are using root 3. And we want to determine the adjacent. We have hypotenuse to be 2. So this sign indicates the direction. So that is downward and below the horizontal axis. So therefore, we have hypotenuse to be 2, then raised to power 2 according to this theorem equals to opposite root 3 raised to power 2, then plus adjacent. So that is what we want to determine now. 2 square we have 4, root 3 square we have 3 plus adjacent square, which implies by collecting items 3 is coming here. So we have adjacent square equals to 4 minus 3, which is equals 1. So when we determine the square root of 1, square root on both sides now. So this cancels this adjacent square, that is adjacent equals to root of 1, which is 1. So therefore, we'll be able to determine this side to be 1. So from here to here, we have 1. Now, tangent of an angle now, tan x. Since tan is opposite to adjacent. Now here, opposite remains root x, but along the verticals. So along the vertical axis, which is positive side. So we have minus root 3. Now, adjacent is 1, but along the horizontal towards the left. So we have towards the left of the vertical axis. So we have negative there. So that has to be minus 1. So therefore, simplify further, minus will cancel out. We have tan x to be root of 3. So therefore, the answer here is root 3. Now we want to determine cos x. Cos x equals to adjacent to hypotenuse. Adjacent divided by hypotenuse, that is r. So which implies adjacent here is minus 1. Don't forget it's along the horizontal axis and towards the left of the vertical axis. So we have minus 1. So that sign indicates the direction. So therefore we have minus 1 divided by hypotenuse remains 2. So divided by 2, which implies cos x equals to minus 1 over 2. So therefore, in conclusion now, we have cos x to be minus 1 over 2 and we have tan x to be root of 3. So that is that. So we are going to solve the order by calling the fourth quadrant. Because in the fourth quadrant too, sign of an angle is said to be negative. Watch out for the third part, which is part 3 of the same question. So we are still on the same question. With this given information, sin x equals to minus root 3 divided by 2. We have to find tan x and cos x. Now, since we are doing the same acronym, that is, we have ACT, which implies in the first quadrant, all the trig ratio, sine, cos, tangent are positive. In the second quadrant, sine is positive. In the third, tan is positive. And in the fourth, then cos is positive. So that's why we move this way, ACT, ACTS. So now the given angle here, x, so the ratio of sine x is said to be negative. So we have considered the third quadrant here. The next is to consider the fourth quadrant. Because in the third quadrant, sine is said to be negative. Because only tangent that is positive here. Here is only cosine that is positive. Both sine and tangent are said to be negative here. Here, both sine and cos are said to be negative, while tangent is positive. So therefore, we are going to consider the fourth quadrant. On the fourth quadrant, this is the first, and we have the second. Now, on the fourth quadrant here, we have to consider this. So this side is negative side of y. This side is negative side of x. This side is positive side of y. This side is positive side of x. So now we have this. So we right angle triangle here. Then we have the given angle here, x. Now, sine x. Since sine of an angle, sine x equals to opposite to hypotenuse. Now, the minus here indicates the direction. So we should not bother ourselves with the minus sign because it indicates the negative direction. We have to consider the value. So that is in the numerator and the denominator. In the numerator here we have opposite, which is root 3, then divided by hypotenuse 2. Here we have the hypotenuse, the longest side, then the angle x is facing this side. Therefore, this side is said to be opposite, which is root 3. Now, in this case, we want to calculate the adjacent here using Pythagoras theorem. In Pythagoras theorem, we have hypotenuse here, we have opposite here. In Pythagoras theorem, we have hypotenuse square equals to opposite square plus adjacent square. Now, hypotenuse square is said to be 2 square. Then opposite is said to be root 3 square. The adjacent is unknown. We want to calculate the adjacent. That is why we use, or that's why we are using Pythagoras theorem. Solving further here, we have 4, that is 2 square, root 3 square. We have 3, the square root, and the power of 2 will cancel out. So we have power of 2 here, we cancel out. Then here we have adjacent square. Solving further, 3 is coming here. So therefore we have adjacent square equals to 4 minus 3, which is 1. So therefore, adjacent, by taking the square root on both sides, so adjacent equals to square root of 1, which is 1. So therefore, we have adjacent to be 1. So in continuation, so we want to calculate the tangent. Tan of an angle, tan x equals to opposite divided by adjacent. Now here, opposite is root 3. But along the negative side of y. So we have minus root of 3 divided by adjacent is 1. We have adjacent here to be 1 along the positive side of x. So we have plus 1. We have 1 here. So when we divide, so we have tan x to be minus root 3. Now cos x. Cosine of an angle is ratio of adjacent to hypotenuse. Here adjacent is 1 along the positive side of x. We have plus 1 divided by hypotenuse remain 2. So we are dividing by 2. So therefore cos x equals to 1 over 2. Now in conclusion, quadrant sin x equals minus root 3 divided by 2 tan x equals to root 3, then cos x equals to minus 1 over 2. Don't forget, in the third quadrant, so tangent is positive. So by using the acronym ACT, so tangent is positive. When we consider the acronym ACT now, that is ACT, we have the first one, so we have the fourth, we have the third, and we have the second. So therefore in the third here, we have tangent is positive. Both sine and cos are negative. Now, the fourth quadrant, sin x remains minus root 3 divided by 2. Tan x equals minus root 3 and cos x equals 1 over 2. So this is the final answer. Please like, comment, share with your friends, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more educational content. Thank you.